Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Before we start today's case, I want to ask for your support by subscribing to my channel. Your support is very important to me, so please subscribe to follow more cases and encourage us. Click the like button and let's get into the case. Sarah Miller stepped off the small plane onto the tarmac of Valdez Airport, her breath visible in the crisp Alaskan air. The weight of her camera equipment hung heavy on her shoulder, a constant reminder of her purpose here in this remote corner of the world. She inhaled deeply, the scent of pine and salt water filling her lungs. This was it, the starting point of what she hoped would be her breakthrough documentary. As she made her way to the terminal, Sarah's mind raced with possibilities. For years, she had dreamed of capturing footage of orcas in their natural habitat. Not just the fleeting glimpses most documentaries offered, but intimate up-close encounters that would bring viewers face to face with these magnificent creatures. Prince William Sound was known for its orca populations, and she was determined to get the footage that would set her work apart. Inside the small airport, Sarah scanned the crowd, looking for her guide. She spotted a rugged-looking man in his 50s holding a sign with her name. As she approached, he extended a weathered hand. "Ms. Miller, I'm Jack Hawkins. Welcome to Valdez." Sarah shook his hand firmly. "Please, call me Sarah. It's great to meet you, Jack. I can't tell you how excited I am to get started." Jack's expression remained neutral, but Sarah detected a hint of skepticism in his eyes. "Well, let's get your gear loaded up and we can head into town. We've got a lot to discuss before we hit the water." As they drove into Valdez, Sarah couldn't help but marvel at the stunning landscape. Snow-capped mountains loomed in the distance, their reflections shimmering on the surface of the Sound. The town itself was small but charming, with colorful buildings standing out against the rugged backdrop. Jack pulled up to a small bed and breakfast. "This is where you'll be staying. Drop off your personal items, and then we'll head down to the docks to go over the boat and equipment." Sarah nodded, her excitement building. She quickly freshened up and met Jack outside. At the docks, she was introduced to their vessel, a sturdy 30-foot boat equipped with state-of-the-art navigation and filming equipment. As Sarah began setting up her cameras, Jack cleared his throat. "Listen, Sarah, I need to make sure you understand what we're dealing with here. These aren't trained animals in a park. Orcas are apex predators and we're entering their territory." Sarah paused her work, looking up at Jack. "I understand that, Jack. I've done my research. I know the risks, but I also know the potential rewards. This footage could change how people see orcas, help with conservation efforts." Jack cut her off. "I've been guiding these waters for 30 years, and I've seen what these animals can do. They're intelligent, yes, but they're also unpredictable. You need to promise me that you'll follow my lead out there. No unnecessary risks." Sarah met his gaze, her determination evident. "I promise, Jack. I respect your experience, but I also need you to understand how important this is to me. I'm not here for some tourist experience. I'm here to create something meaningful." Jack held her gaze for a moment longer before nodding. "All right, let's go over the safety protocols and get the rest of this gear stowed." The next few hours were a flurry of activity as Sarah and Jack prepared for their expedition. They went over emergency procedures, discussed optimal filming locations, and plotted their course through the Sound. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the water, Sarah felt a mix of excitement and nervous anticipation. That night, sleep eluded her. Sarah tossed and turned, her mind filled with images of sleek black dorsal fins cutting through the water. When she finally drifted off, her dreams were a jumble of crashing waves and haunting whale songs. The next morning dawned clear and cold. Sarah arrived at the docks before sunrise, her camera equipment packed and ready. Jack was already there doing a final check of the boat. "Morning," he grunted, not looking up from his work. "Weather report looks good. We should have clear skies and calm seas." Sarah nodded, suppressing a yawn. "Perfect. Where do you think our best chances are for spotting a pod?" Jack straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag. "There's been some recent activity near Glacier Island. We'll start there and see what we find." As they cast off and headed out into the Sound, Sarah felt her exhaustion melt away, replaced by a growing sense of anticipation. The water stretched out before them, a vast expanse of possibility. She set up her cameras, making sure everything was ready for that crucial moment when they spotted their first orca. Hours passed with no sign of the animals. Sarah kept her eyes glued to the horizon, searching for any hint of movement. Jack remained at the helm, his expression unreadable, as he scanned the water. Just as Sarah was beginning to feel discouraged, Jack's voice cut through the silence. "There, 2 o'clock!" Sarah's head snapped up, her heart racing. In the distance, she saw it, a tall black dorsal fin breaking the surface of the water. Then another and another, a pod of orcas moving gracefully through the sound. "Oh my God," Sarah breathed, her hands shaking slightly as she adjusted her camera. "They're beautiful." Jack maneuvered the boat closer, keeping a respectful distance. "Remember, we don't approach too closely. Let them come to us if they're curious." Sarah nodded, barely hearing him as she focused on capturing the perfect shot. The orcas seemed unbothered by their presence, continuing their journey through the sound. She zoomed in, capturing the sleek bodies as they rose and fell in the water, the distinctive white patches stark against their black skin. As they followed the pod, Sarah felt a growing sense of frustration. The footage was good, but it wasn't the intimate, up-close encounter she had dreamed of. She bit her lip, glancing at Jack. "Can we get a little closer?" she asked, trying to keep her voice casual. Jack frowned. "We're at the legal limit now. Any closer could disturb them." Sarah nodded, turning back to her camera, but the idea had taken root in her mind. She needed something more, something that would set her documentary apart. As they continued to follow the pod, an idea began to form. Sarah eyed the small inflatable dinghy secured to the side of the boat. If she could just get a little closer, use the dinghy to maneuver more quietly. She turned to Jack, her decision made. "I want to take the dinghy out. I can get closer without disturbing them. Get the shots we need." Jack's response was immediate and firm. "Absolutely not, it's too dangerous." "But Jack, think of the footage we could get. I'll be careful, I promise. Just a quick trip in and out." Jack shook his head. "I said no, Sarah. It's not worth the risk." Sarah felt frustration bubbling up inside her. She had come too far, invested too much to settle for mediocre footage. In that moment, she made a decision that would change everything. "I'm sorry, Jack," she said quietly, "but I have to do this." Before Jack could react, Sarah was moving. She quickly lowered the dinghy into the water, grabbing her handheld camera and life vest. Jack's shouts of protest faded as she started the small motor, guiding the dinghy towards the pod. As she drew closer to the massive animals, Sarah felt a mix of exhilaration and fear. She was getting the shots she had dreamed of, the powerful flukes, the intelligent eyes, the sheer majesty of these creatures up close. She was so focused on her filming that she didn't notice one of the orcas changing direction. By the time she saw the massive black and white form heading straight for her, it was too late. The last thing Sarah saw was the orca breaching, its enormous body rising out of the water directly above her small dinghy. Then everything went black, as the world exploded into chaos around her. The inflatable dinghy bobbed gently on the surface of Prince William Sound, a tiny speck against the vast expanse of steel-grey water. Sarah Miller's hands trembled with excitement as she adjusted her camera, her breath forming small clouds in the crisp Alaskan air. She was close now, closer to the orcas than she had ever dreamed possible. "This is it," she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible over the gentle lapping of waves against the dinghy's sides. "This is what I came for." Through her viewfinder, Sarah watched in awe as the pod of orcas glided through the water, their sleek black and white bodies moving with an almost otherworldly grace. She zoomed in, capturing the intricate details of their skin, the powerful muscles rippling beneath the surface, the intelligent glint in their eyes. "Absolutely magnificent," Sarah breathed, her finger pressing down on the shutter release. Each click of the camera sent a thrill through her body. This was the footage that would make her documentary stand out, that would bring viewers face to face with these incredible creatures in a way they had never experienced before. In her excitement, Sarah barely registered the angry shouts coming from the main boat, where Jack was frantically waving his arms, trying to get her attention. His words were lost to the wind and the sound of her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Sarah panned her camera, following the movement of a particularly large male orca as it broke the surface. Its dorsal fin, easily 6 feet tall, sliced through the water like a knife. She zoomed in further, capturing the unique pattern of scars and markings that identified this individual. "Oh, you're a beauty," Sarah murmured, her eyes glued to her viewfinder. "Just look at you." So focused was she on her filming that Sarah failed to notice a subtle shift in the pod's behavior. The orcas, which had been moving in a loose formation, began to tighten their circle. Their movements became more agitated, their dorsal fins cutting through the water at sharper angles. On the main boat, Jack's face had gone pale. He recognized the signs of agitation in the orca's behavior, signs that Sarah, in her inexperience and excitement, had missed entirely. "Sarah," he shouted, his voice hoarse with fear. "Get back here now. They're not happy." But his words were lost in the wind, drowned out by the sound of Sarah's excited narration as she continued to film. "This is incredible footage," Sarah was saying into her camera's microphone. "We're seeing behavior here that's rarely been captured on film. The way they're moving, it's almost like they're communicating." Her voice trailed off as she finally registered the change in the orca's behavior. The pod was moving faster now, their sleek bodies cutting through the water with purpose, and they were getting closer. Sarah's heart began to race, a tendril of fear worming its way into her excitement. She lowered her camera, suddenly acutely, aware of how small and vulnerable she was in her tiny inflatable dinghy. "Okay," she said, her voice shaky. "Okay, maybe it's time to head back." She reached for the dinghy's motor, her hands fumbling with the controls. But before she could start it, a massive black